Hello everybody, and thank you for joining Highfield's Functional Skills Support English webinar on Levels 1 and 2. My name is Nikki Ward and I'm the Head of Qualification Development here at Highfield. Joining me today is Antonia, and she's our Principal Examiner, and we also have Marge, who's one of our Functional Skills team leaders, on the call as well. My colleague Amy is also with us and she'll be monitoring your questions and providing any technical support throughout. So before we start, I'd like to draw your attention to the top right hand side of your screen, where you'll be able to see a small control panel. From here, you'll be able to select audio options and type in your questions as the webinar progresses. We'll aim to answer all of your questions at the end of the webinar and at various points during the session should we feel it's relevant. You'll also have a facility to raise your hand. Please do this if you're experiencing any technical difficulties during the webinar, or if you're unable to hear or see the presentation slides. And as you do that, my colleague Amy will be able to support you. After we finish today, we'll close the webinar excuse me, with a technical questionnaire. And once this is done, you'll be presented with a short survey. You'll need to wait a few seconds before the survey pops up. However, please do complete this for us, as all feedback is taken on board and it's really important for us here at Highfield. We'll like to make sure that we're meeting your needs and on all of your expectations. So I think we've just about got everybody in now, so let's get started, and over to you, Antonia.
Thanks, Nikki. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Antonia Sherritt-McGrain. I'm the Principal Examiner for Functional Skills English Level 1 and Level 2. I've been engaged with functional skills since inception and therefore have been heavily involved with the legacy qualifications and now the transition and implementation of the reform qualifications. Our aim today is to facilitate an active platform whereby we can discuss key trends and areas of issues. As a supplement to our previous webinars, hopefully this forum will allow us to share best practice and also to discuss possible teaching strategies and how best to prepare learners for assessment and possible indicative content. It's important to reiterate at this point that for whichever AO you are using for your functional skills assessments, that taught input is informed by our particular amplifications and the interpretations within. Our discussions today will further support that and hopefully ensure more targeted delivery and subsequent enhanced results for you and your learners. We'll focus on those areas where we may see opportunity for loss of marks or areas where centres may have requested additional input and support. With that in mind, we'll explore and discuss as follows: question types and staggered answers, comparative answers, including the conveyance at level 2, purpose and related vocabulary, features amongst those features, so such as language features, textual features, textual devices, and so on, meeting the needs of purpose and audience, and hints and tips in terms of how to implement these into practice. In terms of best approach, I'll discuss the content of each slide, and as I'm doing so, if you have any questions, please drop them into the question box and I'll respond accordingly at the end of each one. And staggered answers. Where we have questions either at level 1 or at level 2 where they are worth more than 1 mark, the latter marks are usually dependent on answering the first mark correctly. So for example, is text A formal or informal? Give a reason for your answer. So in this instance here, they wouldn't get the latter mark unless they'd actually identified the first mark correctly. So is text A formal or informal? If they answer that correctly and then give a supporting reason that is, it's a correct explanation, then of course they would gain the latter mark. Where this would differ, generally tending more towards level 2, we might ask, what is the purpose of text A? In that instance, the candidate may not answer correctly. However, the second part of the question stem asks the learner to identify a textual device and say how this meets the purpose. So in reality here, we're actually testing them to see if they're also aware of what a textual device is. So they might answer that part correctly and give a justifiable reason as to how it meets the purpose that they've identified. So whereby their purpose might not be correct and they wouldn't gain the first mark, they may be able to gain the latter marks because they've identified what a textual device is and how it could support their purpose. Very similar to a maths approach, really. We're allowing for follow through, so we're not penalising them for getting the first part of the question incorrect, and we do give them the opportunity to gain further marks later in the question stem. Another area where they may be asked to give 2 reasons or state 2 ways. So again, in this instance, the marks would be reliant upon each other. So using text A, give 2 reasons, and then the remaining of the question stem. So really important to, allow the learners to identify how many marks each question is worth and to really try and dissect the question stem to see how much of a detailed response is required. Do we have any questions at the end of that slide relative to questions and staggered answers? No, okay, move on. If we look at comparative, comparison is a new skill set for level 1, and you'll also notice within the subject content and what has, kind of transitioned from legacy to the reform qualification is there is no mention of contrast. This is what, we're really keen that learners understand that a comparator is an acknowledgement of similarities and differences. And learners need to understand, that information, ideas and opinions on the same topic may differ across the text, and that's where the opportunity for comparison, presents itself. Learners must also use the indicated text. You will notice with all of our question stems, we're quite prescriptive in terms of which text the learner should access to gain the requested information. So the example given here, using text A and text B, compare the information provided about studying. We'd be encouraging learners to use connectives. At level 1, they can be quite simplistic in terms of and, then, but, however. And again, this is just a real easy, quick visual reference that a learner then knows, they're able to demonstrate that comparative ability. At level 2, we'd be encouraging them to use more sophisticated connectives, such as therefore, furthermore, however, whereas. And then realistically, that really links, rather than giving simplistic sentences, if they're using those connectives either simple or sophisticated, it's a real clear visual that that learner is able to compare the relative information. We discussed this at level 2, and this has been an area of interest where we see learners maybe drop marks because they're not really looking at what needs to be conveyed. So our questions, you will either see using text A and B, compare the information about studying and how this is then conveyed. In some of our papers, it might be broken down into 11A, compare the information, 11B, how is this information conveyed? So it's no difference, it's the same mark allocation, but we're asking them the same thing, but we're asking learners to really be quite clear in what needs to be conveyed and how. So if we look at this, for example, here, using text A and text B, compare information about studying and give 2 examples. Explain how this information has been conveyed. So they might include within their possible answers that they've, text A has used a first person pronoun and lots of punctuation to emphasize points, whereas text B uses rhetorical questions to draw the reader in. Another example might be text A discussed health and safety aspect by using facts and statistics to support their argument, whereas text B is written using the first person pronoun and rhetorical questions to draw the reader in and to personalise the content. So again, it's really focusing on what is being conveyed, and again, looking at how that differs. Your learners may also wish to write about how that information is presented. So, for example, text A is written in a blog format, so it's more informal, whereas text B is an article, uses formal language and images and, punctuation to emphasize points. So it's really about dissecting the comparative questions down, and at level 2, paying particular deference to those questions that are asking how the subject in question is conveyed.
Antonia?
Yeah.
Hi, we've just had a couple of questions in, so I thought it might be a good opportunity before we move on to another subject, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, so I'm just scrolling down to get to the right one, so we might as well deal with them as they come up, mightn't we? Yeah. Angela has said, textual device, is this what Pearson call a writing technique?
I don't believe so. I can't comment on Pearson's. We are coming to textual devices later in this particular presentation. But textual devices is how the information is put across, so to speak. So they might use alliteration, rhetorical questions, statistics. And like I said, we'll go into further detail a little bit later on in this particular.
Brilliant. Okay. And Kelly has asked, are the latter marks achievable determined by the use of one question mark? By the use of one question mark? Kelly, do you want to just add something else to that to see if we can just clarify it a little bit more? Charlotte has said, Pearson call a textual device a language features for reform. So this is a language feature. Okay, so textual devices, we call textual devices clearly what Pearson calls. Yeah.
Yeah, so like if I can just refer back, as I said earlier, it's really important that if you are using a range of awarding organisations or just one or two, very important that whichever awarding organisation you are using to prepare your learners for assessment, that you use their amplifications, because each awarding organisation has varying interpretations of each subject content. So it's really important, like I said, so Pearson are calling one thing, a particular term. Our language features are different. Our language features, again, we'll come to those shortly. That might be, the types of language we use, such as explanatory, descriptive, informal, and formal. So again, a good example there of how it differs across the two AOs. So it's very important that centres are using the relative amplifications for their awarding organisation.
Okay. Kelly has tried to clarify her question. She has said, in the previous slide, you mentioned that learners could only achieve latter marks on certain questions. Are these the questions that only use one question mark?
Just thinking off the top of my head there, I don't. I'll have to have a look at that, Nikki. I can't recall off the top of my head, but generally they are dissected down.
Okay, so Kelly, we'll try and dissect that down and maybe get back to you for further clarification at the end. Somebody has suggested that we put out a glossary. We do have some clarification on the website, don't we, Antonia?
Yeah. There's clarification on the website. And I say, in terms of we've done 2 webinars within the last year. The first one was a generic webinar based purely on the entire amplification range for all of the subject content. And the second webinar that we put in place was relative to those particular subject content areas that were new skill sets, to further support delivery. So there is information out there. Nikki, they've been quite proactive, haven't they, in terms of contacting centres with those amplifications and links to those resources.
Yeah, I'll just do one more question and then we'll let you get on, because I know there's lots of time for questions and answers at the end, and you might answer some of these questions as you go through your PowerPoint. But Leslie, you've asked why we don't use standard terminology. Highfield have used the terminology from the specifications that the DFE actually set. We chose to keep the terminology the same to avoid any confusion. So I think it's potentially other AOs that have changed the terminology. So if you look at the DFE guidance and standard setting documents, you'll see that we've directly lifted all of our terminology from those documents. Just one final thing, I know a lot of you have asked if the slides will be available. Yes, we will send you a link to the slides at the end of the webinar, and also a link to the recording, so that'll just stop a few more questions coming in. So I'll pause on the questions there, Antonia, and I'll let you carry on.
Lovely, thank you. Right, okay, so I think it's really important, just picking up there from where you left off relative to the terminology used, that terminology is used within the teaching strategies as well. So learners are familiar, and they become very familiar with, for example, when we come to it shortly, what is an expected language feature? What is a textual device? Because like we said, our question stems are based on the subject content criteria. So learners really need to understand the terminology that we're looking for, because ultimately that's what we are assessing and marking them against. Okay, if we look at purpose and related vocabulary, you might what we call from the legacy qualifications, we have 6 or 7 purpose types. Simplified that within the form qualifications, and now there are 4 purpose types across level 1 and level 2. Purpose types will be assessed across varying text types, and here you can see at level 1 the text types that a learner may expect to either come into contact with to read an examination or know how to prepare for a writing examination. And so at level 1 we're looking at advert, email, letter, report and instructions. And at level 2 that text type will differ relative to, there are no instructions, but there will be or may be an article. These are already predetermined via the scope of study featured in the subject content criteria. If we look here, we can see at level 1, language features. So whereas before for the legacy qualification, for the language features, we would generally be looking to see if they were using formal or informal language, and whether or not they were able to maintain that throughout the entire text. So no amalgamation, no contractions. If they decided to use formal writing or informal, we allowed them to, proceed in that vein. You will see here the language features are based very much on the purpose type. So instructional, persuasive, explanatory, descriptive. Are they writing formally or informally, or is the information presented formally or informally? Progression to level 2 is the same content. So here in at level 2, we refer to it as vocabulary. So the language features at level 1, progressing learners forward, we then refer to it as vocabulary. So it's no different. It's associated to the purpose type and audience relative to, the text that they're being assessed against. So for example, if it was an advert, is the vocabulary persuasive? Well, generally it is. Textual features at level 1 and level 2. Textual features are how the text is presented. So have they used bold, italics, images, varying font sizes? How this progresses to level 2, again, the textual features are bold, italics, images, and varying font sizes or different font types. But then we see the progression to textual devices. So the textual devices, in terms of how the information is portrayed. So, has the author used rhetorical questions, alliteration, statistics, similes, repetitions, metaphors? So you can see here that these types of features, they are quite explicit within our interpretation. These can all be found within the amplifications. And there are none further to this. We would be looking purely for these features stipulated here. So it's about the learners acknowledging what is a language feature or a vocabulary style, what is a textual feature, and what is a textual device. Move further on, we can see organizational and structural features. So within the legacy qualifications, these were referred to as structural features. So how does a particular text look? So for example, if we're talking about a letter, then an organizational or a structural feature would be sender's address, recipient's address, an opening, a closing, a date, those kind of things. And I've given some other examples here, such as headings, titles, subheadings, bullet points, numbered lists. How we progress this from level 1, which is the area featured on the left, to level 2, the organizational features don't change, they're just featured as given at level 1. What we've seen the introduction of are organizational markers, and this is where learners are really actively encouraged to use scope and to use imagination, given the scenario that are given within the text types for the 2 assessments for writing. Organizational markers refer to things such as contents, list pages, captions to images, text boxes, footnotes, indices, and menus. And what you'll notice is that we are actively using those organizational markers to further raise awareness. I know obviously there has been debate, across the sector relative to organizational markers, and just to try and simplify things and to demonstrate learner ability. Within a letter, for example, say the learner is asked to write a letter of complaint or write maybe to the council with ideas. I'd be tempted to group the ideas or my areas of complaint and use, some kind of list, or I might write a footnote at the end and, try and indicate that within the text type. So it's really about asking the learners to really put as many of those features within the text type as possible to demonstrate understanding and also competency. If we look at the writing assessment, we're wanting to meet the needs of purpose and audience. So remember, there are just 4 purpose types that we're assessing across level 1 and level 2. We've already discussed the text types that they may be asked to produce at assessment. So it's important that the learner has an understanding of the different purpose types, has an understanding of what kind of vocabulary or language could be linked to each of these purpose types. And again, a very simplistic example might be an advert, quite simply selling an item, then the language or the vocabulary used would be persuasive. Alternatively, you could have a complaint to a supplier, a letter of complaint to a supplier, or an email of complaint. And within that, we'd be expecting them to use explanatory, but then also formal language or vocabulary. So quite here, what we're looking for is that they're able to produce the appropriate text type, and they're always told what text type to produce. And then it's down to the learner to establish a purpose and to use vocabulary or language to support that purpose. Level 1, they are given bullet point task descriptors. So those bullet points, all of them must be referred to within the written piece to fully meet the task requirements. One of the tasks, normally task 1, is also given a word count, and there must be deference to that word count. The second task, there is no word count. However, because they've seen the kind of content and the depth of content that they should include with task 1, the anticipation is they would apply the same methodology to task 2. Again, considering the purpose and associated vocabulary to fully meet the needs of the task and the audience. So level 1, very, very task descriptive. They're given the scenario, they're given prompts to include, and we would expect learners to address all of the bullet points within their written piece. Level 2, there are no bullet points, but the scenario is there and there is scope for them to write what we are requesting of them. I think the easiest way to kind of look at hints and tips is to consider the vocational areas within which your learners are based, and within which they are studying, and to actually produce teaching tasks that can be used within their contexts, because then it becomes useful to them and it becomes standard. So, for example, if you had a level 1 learner who was working in sales, then you might be asking them to create an advert demonstrating the latest bonus scheme, or to sell a particular kind of item within their industry. If you had learners within hospitality, you might ask them to write a complaint to a supplier. Or for an email within business admin, you might ask them to devise an email requesting information relative to their department or sector. And then a report, for example, in health and safety, they might do a report on site facilities. Think about instructions. An example I might use is somebody working within the catering industry, and there's a full range of instruction tasks that you could use within that sector, for ranging, from recipes to cooking to putting menus together. So it's about devising those standardized tasks and being able to apply them to the many sectors that your learners may be working in. So it might be, as a standardization activity within your teams, you can pull together such tasks and then think about the features that might be associated with each. So if you had somebody working in hospitality and they were wanting to write a letter of complaint to a supplier, well, we'd expect it to be formal language. What structural features would we expect to find in a letter? Well, as I said earlier, sender's address, a recipient's address, the date, an opening, a closing. Then also on here, you'll see that I've popped on there an email. To and from is a standard structural feature. Really important that both of which are given a functional email address. So in reality, if they didn't type in a proper email address, it wouldn't arrive. Subject date, a salutation, and a close. And if we look at level 2, very, very similar. But obviously the difference here is, rather than instructions, we're asking learners to know how to create an article. So within an article, an organisational feature might be a heading, a strapline, the author, columns, bullet points, and so on. And a standard kind of company newsletter could be applied to any kind of industry. And again, including that as a teaching activity, it becomes standard for them, and they know how to apply it and what organisational features are associated with it. Do we have any?
Hi, Antonia. We have got lots of questions in. I'm just wondering how much more of your presentation you've got to go, and whether we should save them to the end or whether you want to take some of them now.
Yeah, let's take questions now. It's really from here, I'd really, welcome people to be sharing best practice ideas. Those few slides that we've just been through there are the areas of new subject content, but then also the areas where we've noticed maybe learners are losing marks. So no further input, rather than a collaborative discussion, and answering those questions and helping each centre to move forward with their teaching activities.
Okay, we've had a lot of people asking when we will have more mock tests available. They are in production, they're almost ready for release, so I anticipate they'll be out next month, and I am answering that to you in the text boxes as I go. So let's just have a look down the list of questions. Let's just come down a little bit. I know, Leslie, you did say that you think that the terminology should be standardised across all AOs, and I have put an answer in the box to say, yes, I do agree. And that's why Highfield made the decision not to stray away from the actual set requirements, and we've used the terminology directly from the standards as they've been set to try and avoid this confusion. I think probably potentially other AOs may have tried to make it easier, but it does sometimes confuse things a little bit. Okay. Is effective use of connectives and conjunctions related to English reading as spelling, punctuation and grammar is not something that they are judged on? That's from Ryan.
No, and they're not penalised for not using a connective. I just think, you know, from my personal viewpoint, I've been involved in the field for many years. It's a real clear and quick, easy way of a learner being able to demonstrate that they can compare and they can compare effectively. Because the alternative is that the learner gives two individual sentences. That then automatically, the marker has to look at those two sentences and determine, are they talking about the same topic or item? Because if they're not, it's not a comparison. So by putting a connective in, it forces them to think about the same topic or the same item, and it allows a clear flow. But like I say, it's each to their own relative teaching strategies. It's just a hint and tip in terms of maybe helping things go forward.
Okay, there are a few questions that are quite specific to the centres and the organisations, I think. So I think those ones we will answer individually to you and potentially contact you for a discussion if you think that would help. I'm just looking through, because some of them are asking about how they do things with the platform. So I think that's more of a technical one that we can just answer directly with them themselves. Okay, so there are 3 points awarded for organisational markers. However, I feel that they are using these purely to gain those 3 marks rather than being a realistic letter which would be used more practically. That's from Julie.
Yeah, we've had this discussion before in the sector, to be honest. And I think, you know, if you look at why the reforms have come around in terms of upskilling learners, the basic letter, you know, the ones that we used to use, yes, really quite straightforward. What we're wanting is to upskill the learners. So if that means they have to demonstrate further skill set within that letter compilation, then that's what we need to do, really. And so this is why, as an AO, we've tried to be proactive in terms of how can we help learners and how can we resolve that expectation. So, like I was saying earlier, if they were having to collate a letter and I had to make sure I had to feature organisational markers within there, I'd be grouping my collective thoughts or opinions or what I wanted a particular company to do about a particular complaint into, you know, bullet points or a numbered list, or including, you know, some kind of image or text box. We don't expect learners to be sat there and drawing, but quite in a box, and right within that image, you know, it's demonstrating that awareness.
Okay, hopefully that answers, but if you need further clarification, just add it to your text box and we can come back to it. I've got one here from Stephanie. She says, if a learner states a purpose is to inform as opposed to explain, will they still get marks for it?
No. Inform is from the legacy qualification. It's no longer a purpose that we test within the reform qualification. We are asking learners to be aware of the 4 purpose types. So where the question states, what is the purpose of text A? It's one of those 4 purpose types. And inform is no longer featured within that.
Okay. I've got one here from Ryan. He says, just a question on organisational markers. Learners are expected to identify these in reading level 2 and include them in their writing pieces for level 2. Is that correct?
If they are featured within reading at level 2, hang on a moment. Yeah, in reading level 2, we don't test their ability to spot an organisational marker. We ask them to understand and identify organisational features. The organisational markers are in the writing papers.
Okay. Lynn is saying she gets confused between textual features and organisational features. Could you give us some clarification on that, please, Antonia?
Yeah, so if you think of the text type, so as stipulated earlier in terms of level 1 text types and the level 2 text types. So letter, email, report, instructions at level 1, article at level 2. Organisational features is what text looks like. What would you expect to see, for example, on an email? So on an email, an organisational feature is the to, the from, the subject, the date, the opening and closing. On a letter, sender's address, recipient's address, date, opening, closing. On a report, it might be something like a title, an author and a date. So the organisational features, as within the legacy qualification, it was referred to as structural features. What is associated with each text type? The textual features are relative to the text only. What does the actual, how the wording looks? So have they used bold and bolden text? Have they used differing font sizes? Have they used italics, underlining? So it's about the actual content, the text itself. They are the textual features.
Okay, hopefully that clears that up for you. But again, let us know in your questions if you've got any further clarification requirements. Ryan has asked another question. He said, can you please clarify the writer's voice?
Yeah, so the writer's voice would be things like enthusiastic, eager, gloomy, sad. So it's more of the feel for how they're trying to portray the information. The emotion involved with it, probably.
Okay.
Be a better way to explain it.
Okay, I've got one here from Zach. How important is it for answers to be put into sentences where a one-word answer would suffice, e.g. formal or informal?
Yeah, so within, first and foremost, at level 2, we would be encouraging them to write in full sentences. They're not penalised if they don't, but if they don't, then obviously they can't gain those latter marks for use of complex sentencing and paragraphs and so on. So where the question stem asks, is text C formal or informal? Give 2 examples for your answer. So for the first part, quite simply, yes, they could write formal or informal, but at level 2, we'd never just want that as an answer. We would always then ask them to expand upon it. So formal or informal, completely fine. They might gain the first mark for that, but then the latter marks, we're asking them to expand.
Okay. There's loads of these, Antonia. If a question
That's
in
right.
the reading, if a question in the reading exam asks how the writer has used vocabulary, what sort of answer would you be looking for? That's from Louise.
Yeah, so vocabulary is a progression of language features from level 1. So we'd be looking for like formal, informal, but then also linking it to the purpose. So explanatory, instructive, descriptive. So it's really important that learners have a firm understanding of the 4 purpose types and how the vocabulary is then used for that. So the elaboration is descriptive, explanatory, instructive, informal, formal.
Okay. Angela has said, who decided not to allow a dictionary in the writing exam? In real life, you would always use a dictionary. Absolutely, Angela, but we don't set the standards on this, I'm afraid. They're set by the Department for Education and we have to follow them to the letter. So, I can't say that we would always agree with everything that they say, but we have to abide by it. So, Louise has asked for what the 4 purpose types are, Antonia.
So the 4 purpose types are explain, instruct, describe, and what is the other one? I just put them on here, haven't I? Let's have a look. I have to go back on this PowerPoint so we can Got me there, Nikki? Any more questions?
Yep. Okay, so I've got another one from Zach. For the compare questions, are they okay to just identify either one similarity or a difference, or should they be identifying one of each to gain full marks?
Yeah, I mean, best practice should encourage them one of each, but they won't be penalised if they're only identifying the similarities because of the shift from compare and contrast to the overarching compare that we're looking for now. It is about acknowledging that a comparison is a similarity and a difference. So by all means, if they only put similarities on there, they've been able to look at the same topic, they've been able to see how it differs across the text, and they form their own opinion of that. So that's perfectly fine.
Okay, and then Kerry has asked, will we be going through speaking, listening, and communication today? I don't know if have we got that on the slides, Antonia?
No, I haven't featured that today, no.
Okay, Kerry, if there's anything specific that you want to ask about the speaking and listening, if you want to just type it in. If we don't get time today, we can always come back to you, or we can look to do a webinar on that, as you have suggested, if you've got quite a few questions that you think may be needing an answer. I think that's about it for now, because a lot of them are very specific to the individual, so we'll get back to those individually. That'll give you a chance to carry on for a little bit longer, Antonia, and obviously for you, the people on the audience, if there's more questions, if you keep them coming in, then we can do another session towards the end with Antonia and try and get some clarification for you. I've said back over to you then, Antonia.
Yeah, so really there we come to the end of the actual, the actual input, but I just really, when we reach the question slide, really open to, centres sharing the kind of teaching activities they're using in situ at present, what seems to be working for them, what they need further support with. So, if anybody's got any ideas, obviously I've touched briefly on the kind of text types and how you could implement them per vocational setting. But I'd be really interested, for people to share what they're doing at present and how, other centres may be able to take that on board and kind of move forward with it. So if anybody's got any suggestions, please pop those in now.
Okay, we have a couple more coming in, Antonia. Are quotes essential for the compare questions?
Only where the question stem asks for specific examples. The question stem may say, and give one example from the text to support your answer. So within that, we would expect them to do a lift to support what they've said.
Okay. Leslie has asked regarding speaking and listening, does it need to be videoed or can it just be audio? Absolutely, it can be audio. So I think we give you a number of choices here at Highfield. You can complete the tick sheet, but just do the ticks and the minimum amount of writing if you've got an audio or a video recording. Or if you don't want to or don't have the facility to audio and or video record, then you can write a report about what the learner has achieved, and that will be sufficient. So hopefully that answers the speaking and listening question there. There's one here from Lynn. When asking for compare and contrasting information, are they asking for you to compare the content or the textual devices or features?
It will stipulate that within the question stem. The question stem will always tell you what it wants you to compare. So, for example, compare the viewpoints on, or compare the opinions of. So the question stem is always very specific in terms of what comparison is needed.
I'm just reading through them as we go, Antonia.
I mean, that also falls over into conveyancing, comparing how the viewpoints are conveyed or how the opinion is conveyed, how the information is conveyed. So really important that level 2, we're not just giving them teaching activities that include pure comparison of a particular element. We need to look at how that element is then conveyed to the reader. And obviously, like I say, this is a new skill set for the level 2. So it is about incorporating that into regular teaching activities so the learner is familiar with it and is clear on expectation.
Okay, I've got another one here from Stephanie. In the writing test, oh, they're coming in and they keep moving. In the writing test at level 2, when it asks for a range of punctuation, are we looking at a minimum number of punctuation to be used?
Yeah. Within writing level 2, we'd expect to see for a range at least 4, and they are stipulated within, you know, within the guidance. So, for example, at level 2, we'd be wanting them to look at colons, commas, inverted commas, apostrophes, and quotation marks. That's obviously building on level 1. Whereas within level 1, we'd be expecting them to use correct capitalisation, full stops, appropriate end of sentence punctuation. So yeah, a range of punctuation is minimum 4.
Okay, we've had quite a few people saying that they would find a speaking, listening, communication webinar really useful, and we can absolutely look to do that for you. I don't know if while you're on, or if maybe as a follow-up, if there's anything specific that you would like to see in there. If you want to either put this in the chat or email it in to us, then we can certainly look to put another webinar on around that. I think the other thing I would say to you is if there's something specific that you think within the context of the English functional skills that you would like to do a workshop on where we can get some resources for you, again, either put that in the chat now or follow it up with some specific email to us and we can look at that for you. I'm just having a look at the questions as they come in, Antonia, just seeing if there are any more. Bear with me. Okay, Zach's sent another one and he said, as the writing tasks are short pieces of text, some of these organisational markers, oh my goodness, it's scrolling. Some of these organisational markers are difficult to apply, i.e. contents and page numbers. Would you suggest or others are or is anybody teaching anything different for this?
I think a good example I could give you there, Zach, is, for example, a report. For a report, the expected minimum content you'd expect to see relative to organisational features would be a title, a date, and an author. So they've already gained really maximum marks there. So then any other kind of organisational feature that they used as a kind of a marker, such as a numbered list or bullet points or subheadings, we then allow for marking of that within the organisational markers. Because obviously they've demonstrated full capability. It may be how they've actually set out the text. It's really effective. So in that instance, the learner's not penalised for not necessarily using a full range of organisational markers, but just actually knowing how to set out that document in a professional manner to suit the needs of the audience and the purpose of the text time.
Okay. I think that's about it for now, Antonia. The rest of the comments coming in are either specific to centres or they're asking, well, they're giving ideas of what they might like to see on additional workshops. If I have missed your question, I do apologise. There's a lot in there and I've been trying to scroll through them. If we just give it another minute to see if there's anything else that comes in. What we will do, everybody, is scroll through all of the questions at the end and make sure that they are all answered individually to you. And obviously, please do feel free to email us and let us know if there is anything that hasn't cropped up on the webinar today that you might like to ask or that might help and support you with your functional skills English exams. And again, lots and lots of suggestions for additional workshops. And I think that's about it. But what I would like to say is, as we're coming to an end, Thank you everybody for attending today's webinar. I do hope you found it useful, and as I've said, if there is anything that hasn't been covered today, even if you think about it over the next few days, please just drop us an email and we will absolutely get back to you and give you as much support as we possibly can. And then a copy of these slides will be emailed out to you all by my colleague Amy within the week, and we will give you some access to the recordings as well. We plan to share them with you on our YouTube channel in the next couple of weeks. If you subscribe to our YouTube channel and turn on alerts, you'll receive a notification each time a new video is uploaded. And please do take some time to complete the short survey that will pop up after this webinar has ended, as your feedback will really help us to improve any future webinars that are delivered by the team in the future. Thank you again for your time, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much.